I'm Charlotte, 26 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a place I earned through long hours and sheer determination as a data analyst. For most of my life, my home was just a place I slept, while my real life felt like it was happening in the shadows of my family's house a few towns over. It's the story of how my own birthday became the catalyst for uncovering a betrayal so deep it nearly broke me, and how the silence I was forced into became my greatest weapon. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In our family, there were two children but only one star. My brother, Ethan, was the sun around which my parents, Margaret and Richard, orbited. I was the ghost in the machine, the quiet, responsible daughter who kept the system running without ever being truly seen. From a young age, the dynamic was crystal clear. Ethan, 4 years my junior, was charismatic, artistic, and effortlessly charming. He could sketch a portrait that would make my mother weep with pride, while my straight-A report cards earned a simple, "That's nice, dear. Don't let your grades slip." My father, a civil engineer, valued precision and structure, yet he melted at Ethan's creative chaos. He would spend hours helping Ethan build elaborate models for art projects, praising his vision. When I asked for help with my advanced calculus homework, he'd slide the textbook back to me and say, "You're smart, Charlotte. You'll figure it out." It wasn't a compliment, it was a dismissal. My competence was an excuse for their neglect. My mother, a high-end real estate agent, was obsessed with appearances. Ethan was her masterpiece. His freelance graphic design career, while financially unstable, sounded impressive at her dinner parties. "Ethan is designing a logo for a new startup," she'd announce, conveniently omitting that the startup was his friend's gaming channel and the payment was a pizza. Meanwhile, my job as a data analyst was summarized as "Charlotte works with computers." The specifics were too dull, too complex to me. This wasn't malicious, not in the way people imagine villains in movies. It was a slow, steady erosion of my value, a daily lesson in my own irrelevance. Birthdays were the annual showcase of this disparity. Ethan's birthdays were legendary. One year, it was a surprise trip to a music festival. Another, a top-of-the-line drawing tablet that cost more than my first car. My birthdays were afterthoughts. A shared cake, a gift card to a bookstore, and a constant reminder to be grateful. "We have to be fair, Charlotte," my mother would say, ironically. "We can't spoil one child over the other." The gaslighting was so profound that for years I believed her. I thought my quiet nature meant I didn't want the fuss. I convinced myself that I preferred practical gifts. The truth was, I just wanted to be celebrated, to feel like my existence was a reason for joy, not just an item on their parental checklist. The only person who saw me was my Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister. A history professor at the local university, Susan was the family's intellectual anchor and its quiet rebel. She never bought into Margaret's performance of the perfect family. On my birthdays, she'd take me out for lunch, just the two of us. She'd ask me about my work, not just what it was, but what I enjoyed about it, the challenges I faced. She saw the patterns I analyzed in my data sets and recognized them in our family's dynamics. "Your mother loves you," she told me once, stirring her tea. "But she's blinded by the light Ethan gives off. Some people can't see the stars when the sun is out." As I got older, I poured my energy into my career. Data was clean, logical. It didn't play favorites. A well-constructed algorithm worked the same way every time, its success based on merit, not charm. I saved diligently, building a life for myself away from their suffocating orbit. I bought my own apartment, furnished it with things I chose, and for the first time, felt a sense of ownership over my own life. But the pull of family obligation is strong. I still went home for holidays, for Sunday dinners, for birthdays. I played my part, the responsible, invisible daughter, because I thought that's what love meant. I thought that by being compliant and quiet, I was keeping the peace. The financial dynamic was just as skewed. I had paid my own way through college, working part-time jobs and taking out loans which I was methodically paying off. Ethan, on the other hand, was on the family plan. My parents paid his rent, covered his car insurance, and frequently transferred him money for art supplies or networking opportunities. He's a creative, my father would explain, as if that was a diagnosis. It takes time to establish yourself. My Finan. Sile independence was held up as proof that I didn't need their help, while his dependence was proof that he did. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They invested in his potential while treating my success as a given, something that required no nurturing from them. This created a strange sense of guilt in me. I felt like my stability was somehow a betrayal of their narrative. If I was fine on my own, then they were justified in focusing all their resources, emotional and financial, on Ethan. So I never complained. I never asked for a thing. I just kept my head down, worked hard, and hoped that one day they would finally see me. That one day, my quiet consistency would be valued as much as his flashy potential. That was my biggest mistake. I didn't realize they weren't just overlooking me, they were actively using my silence to fund his spotlight. And my 26th birthday was destined to be the day the stage lights finally burned out. The week leading up to my 26th birthday felt different. There was a buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation that was usually reserved for Ethan. My mother called me twice, asking vague but excited questions. "Are you sure you don't want a party, sweetheart? We could have a few people over." I politely declined, as I always did. Big gatherings at their house always ended with me washing dishes while Ethan held court in the living room. "Just a quiet family dinner is perfect, Mom," I told her. "Okay, but be prepared for a surprise," she'd said, her voice full of a conspiratorial glee that put me on edge. My father, too, seemed unusually invested. He mentioned he'd been handling the logistics for my gift, a phrase he typically used for major engineering projects. For the first time in years, I allowed a flicker of hope to ignite. Maybe this was the year. Maybe, at 26, they finally saw me as an adult, as someone worthy of a real, thoughtful gesture. I'd been saving for a down payment on a small condo, hoping to move from renting to owning within the next year. It was a huge goal, and I'd been working extra freelance data projects on weekends to build my savings. I had mentioned this to my parents in passing, and my hopeful heart dared to wonder if they had remembered. Perhaps their big surprise was a contribution to my down payment. It seemed impossibly generous, completely out of character, but the way they were acting made me believe. It was the kind of life-changing gift that would say, "We see you, we're proud of you, and we are investing in your future." The night of my birthday arrived. I drove to their house, a familiar knot of anxiety and hope tightening in my stomach. The dinner was standard roast chicken, my favorite, which was a small but noted effort. Ethan was in rare form, talking about a potential commission that was sure to be his big break. My parents hung on his every word. I listened, smiled, and played my part. Finally, after the cake was cut and the single, sad candle was blown out, my mother clapped her hands together. "Time for presents," she announced. Ethan slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone, looking bored. My father went to his study and returned with a large, beautifully wrapped box. It was far too big to be a check. He placed it on the coffee table in front of me. "Happy birthday, Charlotte," he said, a genuine smile on his face. My heart was pounding. This was it. This was the moment of validation I had craved for 2.5 decades. I carefully undid the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a brand-new, top-of-the-line professional camera, complete with multiple lenses and a high-end tripod. I stared at it, confused. I wasn't a photographer. I enjoyed taking pictures with my phone like anyone else, but I had never expressed any interest in photography as a serious hobby. It was an incredibly expensive, thoughtful gift for someone else. "Wow," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a lot," my mother beamed. "We wanted to get you something to encourage a hobby. You work so hard, you deserve a creative outlet." I looked from the camera to Ethan, who was now watching with a smirk. The cold dread of understanding began to creep in. "Go on, show her the best part," Ethan nudged my father. My dad picked up the camera and turned it over. Taped to the bottom was a receipt and an application form for a 3-month intensive photography course at the City Art College. The course started the following week. It was a huge commitment, both in time and energy. "We enrolled you," my mom said proudly. "It's all paid for." I felt the air leave my lungs, a hobby I didn't want, and a class I didn't have time for. It was a gift that wasn't about me at all. It was about their idea of who I should be, more creative, more interesting, more like Ethan. But the final blow had yet to fall. As I was trying to formulate a polite way to react, my mother turned to my brother. "Well, Ethan, what do you think?" she asked, as if he were the final judge. He picked up the camera, handling it with an expert's familiarity. "It's a beauty," he said, a greedy glint in his eye. "The new Canon R6, full-frame sensor, shoots 4K video. This is professional-grade stuff." He then looked at me, his expression a perfect blend of pity and condescension. "You'll probably just use the auto mode, huh?" Before I could respond, my mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, let's be realistic. Charlotte will never use this thing properly. She's too busy with her spreadsheets." She laughed, and my father joined in. It was a joke at my expense, a public confirmation of my status as the boring, practical one. And then came the words that shattered everything. My father took the camera from Ethan and held it out not to me, but to my brother. "Actually, son, this is for you," he said. The room went silent. I stared at him, unable to process what was happening. Ethan's feigned surprise was sickeningly convincing. "For me, but it's Charlotte's birthday." My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch felt like ice. "We know, honey, but we had a long talk about it. This camera is an investment in Ethan's career. He can use it for his design work, maybe even get into videography. It's for the family, really." I just stared at the box. My gift, the one they had built up for a week, the one that had made me foolishly hope, was just a prop in a ceremony for my brother. I finally found my voice. "So, what's my gift?" I asked, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. My mother's smile faltered. My father cleared his throat, unable to look me in the eye. "Charlotte," my mother said, her tone shifting from cheerful to stern, the one she used when I was being difficult. "Ethan needs this. You have a good job, you have your savings, you don't need anything. Honestly, with your attitude lately, you don't deserve anything. You don't deserve anything." The words echoed in the silent room. All the years of being quiet, of being responsible, of never asking for anything, it hadn't made them see my value. It had made me valueless in their eyes. I was the self-sustaining utility, and I was no longer entitled to the luxury of being wanted. I looked at my brother, who was now excitedly unboxing the lenses, not even trying to hide his triumph. I looked at my parents, their faces a mixture of justification and annoyance at my lack of gratitude for being publicly humiliated. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded. "I see," I said, and in that moment of devastating clarity, I stayed silent. That night, I went home and packed my bags without a word. The silence in my car on the drive back to my apartment was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that presses in on you until your ears ring. I didn't play music. I didn't cry. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mother's words replaying on a merciless loop. "You don't deserve anything." It was the period at the end of a 26-year-long sentence. It wasn't just about a camera. It was about my entire existence in that family. I was the infrastructure, and Ethan was the monument they built on top of it. My stability wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource they could exploit. When I got to my apartment, the carefully constructed piece of my own space felt alien. It was a home I had built to escape their world, but the poison had followed me back. I walked through the rooms, a ghost in my own life, and saw everything with a new, horrifying clarity. For years, I had made excuses for them. They're just focused on him because he needs more help. They don't mean to be hurtful. They just don't understand me. Now I saw it for what it was, a conscious and continuous choice. They understood me perfectly. They understood that I was reliable, that I wouldn't complain, and that I would absorb the inequity to keep the family unit stable. I was the designated shock absorber. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, a cold, methodical calm settled over me. The emotional part of my brain seemed to shut down, and the analytical part, the data analyst, took over. I sat at my computer and began to pack, not my clothes, but my digital life. I backed up files, secured accounts, and started making a list. The first item was simple, leave, but leaving wasn't enough. A quiet exit was what they expected. I had been quiet my whole life, and it had got me erased. This time, my silence would be a prelude to a reckoning. The next morning, I called my Aunt Susan. I told her I was taking a last-minute trip for a few days and wouldn't be reachable. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole story, yet the shame was too raw. Her voice was full of concern, but she didn't press. "Take care of yourself, Charlotte. Whatever is going on, remember your own worth." Her words were a lifeline. A few days later, still operating in a numb haze, I found myself driving back to my parents' house. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My mother would be showing properties, my father would be at his firm, and Ethan would likely be asleep or out with friends. I used the emergency key I still had, my heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and determination. I wasn't there to steal or to cause damage. I was there for answers. My analyst's brain needed to understand the full scope of the system I had been a part of. What else had I missed? What other truths were hidden beneath the surface of our family's life? I went straight to my father's study. It was his sanctuary, a room of perfect order and quiet control. He kept all the family's important documents in a heavy oak filing cabinet. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I started sifting through folders labeled finances, taxes, and property. For an hour, I found nothing but the mundane records of a typical suburban family. Then, tucked away in a folder labeled miscellaneous holdings, I found a document that made my blood run cold. It was the deed to their house, but it wasn't just a deed. Stapled to the back were several pages of legal paperwork, an addendum I had never seen before. It was a trust, set up by my maternal grandparents years ago. My grandmother had passed away when I was 10, and my grandfather a few years after. They had been wonderful, doting people who always made me feel seen. The trust they had established was for their two daughters, my mother, Margaret, and my aunt, Susan. It contained their primary asset, a significant portfolio of stocks, which they had instructed to be split evenly between their children upon their passing. But there was a second, more specific provision. They had also left this house, their family home, the one my parents now lived in a separate trust. The terms were explicit. The house was to be held for their grandchildren. It was to be legally transferred to me and my brother, Ethan, in a 50-50 split, on my 26th birthday. I read the sentence again, and again. On my 26th birthday, the day they gave my gift to my brother and told me I deserved nothing, they were legally obligated to sign over half of the house to me. The house was my inheritance, my gift. The value of the property, according to a recent assessment attached to the file, was estimated at just over $800,000. My share was worth $400,000. It was more than a down payment, it was a future. It was the security and validation I had been working myself to the bone for, and it had been mine all along. The betrayal was so immense, it was almost surreal. My birthday wasn't just an opportunity for them to humiliate me, it was a deadline they had to circumvent. The expensive camera, the fake surprise, it was all a distraction. A performance designed to manage the situation, to create a narrative where I was the ungrateful one, the one with an attitude, perhaps to build a case against me if I ever found out and fought back. They weren't just neglecting me. They were actively defrauding me of my inheritance, a gift from the only other people in the family who had ever truly valued me. Tucked deeper in the folder was another document that clarified their scheme. It was a draft of a legal agreement drawn up by a lawyer just 3 months prior. In it, they had outlined a plan to have me sign away my rights to the property. The document was titled Intra-Family Transfer and Loan Agreement. It was structured to look like they were giving Ethan a massive loan, using the house as collateral, a loan he would never be able to repay. It would effectively push me out of the ownership structure, leaving him with the primary claim. They were planning to trick me into signing away my birthright, probably under the guise of helping the family. My hands were shaking as I took out my phone and carefully, silently, photographed every single page of the trust, the property assessment, and their fraudulent legal draft. I put the folder back exactly where I found it, leaving no trace of my presence. As I walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a cold, hard purpose. They thought I was the ghost in their family. They were about to find out that ghosts can haunt you. The drive back from my parents' house was a blur of righteous fury. The numbness had been burned away, replaced by a white-hot rage that sharpened my senses and focused my mind. They hadn't just stolen a gift, they had tried to steal my future, a future gifted to me by my grandparents. Their cruelty wasn't passive, it was an active, premeditated conspiracy. The draft of that loan agreement was proof. They had been planning this for months, likely years, waiting for the ticking clock of my 26th birthday to run out. The entire performance, the fake excitement, the camera, the public humiliation, it was all a carefully orchestrated piece of theater designed to manipulate me. Back in the safety of my apartment, I uploaded the photos of the documents to a secure, encrypted cloud server. This was no longer just a family drama. It had crossed the line into serious legal territory. As a data analyst, my instinct was to gather information, to find the patterns, to build an unassailable case. My family operated on a system of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. I was going to dismantle it with a system of cold, hard facts. My first call was to Aunt Susan. This time, I told her everything. I started with the disastrous birthday dinner and ended with the documents I'd found in my father's study. I could hear her sharp intake of breath over the phone. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I knew it," she finally said, her voice a low, angry hum. "I knew your grandfather had set something up for you kids. Your mother was always so vague about the details of the will. She claimed he left everything in a single trust for her and me to manage. She lied to me, too." Her words were a balm to my soul. It wasn't just me. My mother had been deceiving her own sister for years to maintain control. "Granddad was a meticulous man," Susan continued, her historian's mind kicking into gear. "He didn't trust your father's financial judgment, and he saw how Margaret coddled Ethan. He would have put protections in place. Charlotte, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a good one, an estate lawyer who specializes in trust disputes." She gave me the name of a man named Arthur Vance, a former colleague of her late husband who was known for being a shark in the courtroom. "He's expensive," she warned, "but he's the best. I'll help you with the costs." I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought me to my knees. For the first time in this nightmare, I wasn't alone. The next day, I met with Arthur Vance. He was an older man with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. I laid out the story and showed him the photos of the documents. He examined them carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "This is an unambiguous, legally binding trust," he stated, tapping the photo of my grandparents' provision. "The language is ironclad. The property transfer was to be executed on your 26th birthday. Your parents are in breach of their fiduciary duty as trustees. The document they drafted," he said, pointing to the loan agreement, "is evidence of intent to commit fraud." The legal jargon was intimidating, but the meaning was clear. I had them. Arthur explained the strategy. We could send a cease and desist letter and demand the immediate transfer of my half of the property. This would likely lead to a protracted, ugly legal battle. Or, he said, leaning forward, we could wait. "They think you're in the dark," he explained. "They are operating under the assumption that their plan is still viable. The more they do to further this fraudulent scheme, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves. We need to know what their next move is." He was right. A quiet investigation was my best weapon. I needed more data. My father was an accountant before he became a civil engineer, and he was meticulous with his finances. My mother handled their liquid assets and investments. They were a financially savvy team. I needed to understand the full scope of their financial world to see how deep the deception went. Arthur helped me hire a forensic accountant, a woman named Lena, who specialized in uncovering hidden assets and complex financial trails. Over the next few weeks, I became a different person. During the day, I was the same Charlotte, the diligent data analyst at my firm. At night, I was a detective, poring over bank statements, property records, and investment portfolios that Lena's team was slowly unearthing. With Aunt Susan's help, we were able to access records related to my grandparents' original estate, which gave us a baseline. The picture that emerged was staggering. My parents had been systematically siphoning money from the main trust my grandparents had left for my mother and aunt. They had used the funds not for shared family expenses, but to fuel Ethan's life. There were tuition payments for private art classes he dropped out of, a down payment for a luxury car in his name, and thousands of dollars in credit card debt they had paid off for him. They had also taken out a secret second mortgage on the house that was supposed to be mine and Ethan's, to fund a high-risk stock portfolio. The account was in my father's name, but the trades were reckless, speculative. They were gambling with my inheritance, trying to make a quick fortune, probably to build an even bigger nest egg for their golden child. The forensic accountant discovered that they were in the process of setting up a limited liability company, or LLC, with Ethan named as the sole beneficiary. Their plan was likely to transfer the house into this LLC, using the fraudulent loan agreement I'd found as the lega. Justification. Once the house was in the LLC, it would be almost impossible for me to claim my share. It was a sophisticated, deeply cynical plan to completely write me out of my own family and legacy. Every new discovery felt like another stab in the back. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It was a calculated, long-term campaign of financial and emotional abuse. They had used my trust, my silence, and my independence against me. They saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as an opportunity. Because I could take care of myself, they felt justified in robbing me to take care of Ethan. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week before Ethan's 23rd birthday. Lena found a record of a recent, large wire transfer. My parents had moved a significant sum of money, nearly $50,000, from their leveraged investment account into Ethan's personal bank account. The memo line on the transfer read, "Happy birthday, son, for your future." They were giving him his inheritance early, paid for with funds stolen from my grandparents and leveraged against a house that was half mine. They had their timeline, and now I had mine. Ethan's birthday was in 6 days. It was the perfect occasion for my silence to finally be broken. With all the evidence in hand, the rage that had been simmering within me for weeks finally cooled into something much more dangerous: purpose. Arthur, Lena, and Aunt Susan all agreed that a direct legal confrontation was inevitable, but how it began was entirely up to me. I could have Arthur send a blistering legal letter, summoning them to a sterile office for a formal showdown. But that felt too impersonal, too clean. What they did to me was personal. They had turned my birthday into a ritual of humiliation. It was only fitting that I return the favor on their favorite day of the year, Ethan's birthday. My plan wasn't about screaming or crying. I had been silent my whole life, and I decided to weaponize that silence. My revenge would be quiet, digital, and utterly devastating. It would be delivered not with a shout, but with a notification. As a data analyst, I lived in a world of systems, logic, and automated processes. I would use the tools of my trade to build a trap they would walk into themselves. The first step was to consolidate the evidence into an undeniable, easily digestible format. I spent 2 nights compiling everything into a secure, password-protected website. The landing page was simple, with a single title: The Charlotte Inheritance, a Record of Fraud. I created separate sections, each meticulously organized. Section 1, The Trust, contained high-resolution scans of my grandparents' will and the specific clauses about the house. Section 2, The Breach, featured a timeline of events, starting from my 26th birthday and detailing their failure to execute the trust. Section 3, The Conspiracy, showcased the fraudulent loan agreement they drafted, with key phrases highlighted in red. Section 4, The Financials, was the most damning. It contained the forensic accountant's full report, with flowcharts showing how they had siphoned money from the family trust and leveraged my asset, the house, for their risky investments. It included bank statements, mortgage documents, and the record of the $50,000 birthday transfer to Ethan. The final section was titled The Correspondence. It was currently empty, but it was the centerpiece of my plan. This section was for them. Step 2 was setting up the delivery mechanism. I drafted a single, concise email. The subject line was neutral, regarding the estate of grandparents' names. The body of the email was brief and clinical. It read, "To Richard, Margaret, and Ethan. This message is to inform you that you are in breach of fiduciary duty and are implicated in a conspiracy to commit trust fraud regarding the property at their address. All evidence supporting these claims has been compiled and is available for your review. Access the secure file here, link to the website. Password, deserve everything. You have 48 hours to have your legal counsel contact my attorney, Arthur Vance, at Arthur's phone number and email, to arrange the immediate and uncontested transfer of my 50% ownership of the property and the restitution of all misappropriated funds from the primary trust. Failure to comply will result in this evidence being submitted for both civil and criminal proceedings." Charlotte. The password, deserve everything, was a petty, satisfying twist of the knife. It was the antithesis of the phrase they had branded me with. The final step was the timing. I scheduled the email to be sent at exactly 8:00 p.m. on the night of Ethan's birthday. I knew their routine. They would be at their favorite fancy restaurant, the one they always went to for celebrations. They would have just finished their main course, and a candle-adorned dessert would be on its way to the table. They would be in the middle of their perfect family performance, basking in the glow of their golden child. That's when their phones would light up. But an email wasn't enough. They could ignore it, dismiss it as a bluff. I needed to ensure they understood the gravity of the situation immediately. I needed to overwhelm them. Using a simple, legal automated calling service, I scheduled a series of calls to their cell phones. Starting at 8:01 p.m., 1 minute after the email was sent, each of their phones would begin to receive a call every 2 minutes. If they answered, they would hear a pre-recorded text-to-speech message. "This is an urgent notification for name. Please check your email for a message from Charlotte regarding the estate of grandparents' names. Legal action is pending." The message was impersonal, relentless, and impossible to ignore. I programmed it to make 74 calls to each of them over the next few hours, a number chosen for its sheer, oppressive absurdity. It was the digital equivalent of a water-drip torture. The day of Ethan's birthday, I felt a strange sense of calm. I went to work, completed my tasks, and left the office at 5 p.m. like any other day. I went home, made myself a simple dinner, and opened my laptop. At 7:55 p.m., I opened the email scheduler and the automated calling service dashboard. Everything was armed and ready. I imagined them at the restaurant, my mother laughing too loudly, my father looking proud, Ethan soaking in the attention. They were celebrating a future funded by my erasure. Aunt Susan called me at 7:58 p.m. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady. "Ready," I replied. "Good," she said. "Your grandparents would be proud of you. You are fighting for what is right." We stayed on the line, the silence a comfortable blanket between us. At exactly 8:00 p.m., I watched the status on my screen change from scheduled to sent. A minute later, the calling service dashboard lit up. The first wave of calls was being initiated. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. I closed my laptop. There was nothing more for me to do but wait for the echoes of their perfect world shattering. The restaurant was called La Belle Vie, a place my mother adored for its ostentatious decor and overpriced wine list. It was the perfect stage for the final act of her perfect family narrative. I could picture the scene as if I were there. The crisp white tablecloth, the glint of polished silverware, the bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket. My father, Richard, would be wearing his best suit, looking every bit the successful patriarch. My mother, Margaret, would be radiant, her real estate agent smile firmly in place. And at the center of it all, Ethan, the birthday boy, the golden child, accepting their adoration as his birthright. Right on schedule, as the waiter was likely approaching with a tiramisu glittering with birthday candles, their world began to unravel. At 8:00 p.m., 3 emails were delivered simultaneously. At 8:01 p.m., their phones began to ring. The first call was probably dismissed as an annoyance, a telemarketer interrupting a private moment. They would have silenced their phones and returned to the celebration. But at 8:03 p.m., the phones would ring again. And again at 8:05 p.m., a persistent, rhythmic intrusion. It would be my father, the engineer who valued order, who would be the first to break. He would assume it was a work emergency, an urgent problem on one of his construction sites. He would excuse himself, his brow furrowed with irritation. He would step into the lobby, answer the phone, and hear the cold, robotic voice. "This is an urgent notification for Richard. Please check your email for a message from Charlotte." Confusion would morph into alarm. He'd hang up, his heart starting to hammer in his chest, and open his email. He would see the subject line, his blood running cold. He'd read the terse message, click the link, and type in the password, "deserve everything." And then he would see it all. The trust documents. The drafted fraud agreement. The forensic accounting report. The charts and graphs detailing his financial malfeasance, laid out with the same clinical precision he applied to his own engineering blueprints. Back at the table, my mother and Ethan would be growing impatient. Their phones would continue their relentless 2-minute ringing cycle. Margaret, ever conscious of appearances, would be mortified by the disruption. She'd shoot Ethan an apologetic look, her smile strained. When my father didn't return after several minutes, her irritation would turn to genuine concern. She would excuse herself, leaving Ethan alone at the table, the candles on his dessert melting into a waxy puddle. She'd find my father in the lobby, pale and trembling, staring at his phone as if it were a venomous snake. "What is it, Richard? What's going on?" she would demand. He wouldn't be able to speak. He would just show her the screen. Her reaction would be different from his, where he would see the logistical nightmare of being caught. She would see the social implosion. She would see her perfect family image shattered. She would see her sister, Susan, and the betrayal of that relationship laid bare. She would see the word fraud and imagine it whispered among the clients in her high-end real estate circle. The humiliation would be her primary wound. Her phone, still ringing in her hand, would feel like a shriek of accusation. Together, they would return to the table, their faces ashen. Ethan, who had been trying to flag down the waiter for another glass of champagne, would finally sense the shift in the atmosphere. "What's wrong with you two? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Check your email, Ethan," my mother would say, her voice barely a whisper. Annoyed, he would pull out his phone, scroll past the dozens of missed call notifications, and open his inbox. He wouldn't understand the legal documents or the financial charts. But he would understand the conclusion. He would see the $50,000 transfer with the memo, "For your future," presented not as a gift, but as evidence in a criminal case. He would understand that the endless river of money he had taken for granted had a source, and that source was a theft against his own sister. The camera, the car, the rent, the art classes, it was all tainted. The 74 missed calls were not just an annoyance, they were a public announcement of their disgrace. Every 2 minutes, another ring, another reminder that their private sins were now known. Other diners would be starting to stare. The celebratory atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. They couldn't stay. They would signal for the check, pay in a flustered hurry, and practically flee the restaurant, leaving the sad, melting cake behind. The car ride home would be a cacophony of panicked accusations. My mother would blame my father for his sloppy record-keeping. My father would blame my mother for her arrogant belief that I would never fight back. Ethan would be in a state of shock, realizing that his comfortable life was built on a foundation of lies that was now crumbling beneath him. And then the calls would start. Not the automated ones, but desperate, frantic calls to me. They would blow up my phone, but I wouldn't answer. I had blocked their numbers hours ago. Their panic would escalate. They would call Aunt Susan, who would let it go to voicemail. They were completely cut off, isolated in a crisis of their own making, with only the evidence on that website to keep them company. They were forced to sit with the stark, undeniable truth of what they had done, with no one to blame, no one to manipulate, no one to yell at but each other. The confrontation wasn't me screaming at them in a living room. It was the deafening silence on the other end of the line. It was the clinical, emotionless presentation of facts on a screen. I had taken their power away by refusing to engage in their arena of emotional warfare. I had built my own arena, governed by logic and evidence, and in it they stood no chance. The 48-hour deadline passed in what felt like both an eternity and a single, elongated breath. I had turned off my phone, logged out of my personal email, and spent the time at Aunt Susan's house. We drank tea, read books, and spoke very little about the storm that was raging just a few towns over. Her calm presence was the anchor I needed. The silence was no longer a weapon, it was a sanctuary. On the second morning at 10:00 a.m., precisely 40 hours after my email was sent, Arthur Vance called my aunt's landline. "He's here," Arthur said without preamble. "Their lawyer. He's in my office right now." I took a deep, steadying breath. "And they've agreed to all terms," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Unconditional surrender. They will initiate the transfer of your 50% equity in the property immediately. They will liquidate the brokerage account and return all funds taken from it. They have also agreed to a full audit of your grandparents' trust, to be overseen by a neutral third party, and will pay back every cent they misappropriated to both you and your Aunt Susan, with interest." It was over, just like that. No dramatic courtroom battle, no ugly discovery process. They had seen the mountain of evidence against them and knew they had no choice. The threat of criminal charges for fraud was a far greater motivator than any appeal to their conscience. Their entire defense was built on my silence, and when I had spoken, their foundation had crumbled. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal paperwork. True to their word, my parents complied with every demand. They were terrified, and their fear made them efficient. I communicated with them only through Arthur. I received no apologies, no desperate pleas for forgiveness, no emotional letters. Their communications were as cold and clinical as mine had been, which was its own Chi. ND of victory. It proved that without the ability to manipulate, they had nothing to say. The house was sold. The market was strong, and it went for even more than the initial appraisal. My half, after all was said and done, was a life-altering sum of money. The audit of my grandparents' trust revealed the full extent of their deception over the years, and a significant amount was restored to Aunt Susan as well. My inheritance had finally come to me, not as a gift from my parents, but as a victory I had earned myself. With the proceeds, I didn't just buy a condo. I bought a beautiful 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet, green neighborhood on the other side of the state. It had a small garden, a home office with a view of the trees, and a spare room that Aunt Susan used whenever she came to visit. It was a home, not just an apartment. It was mine, built not on lies, but on my own strength. The fallout for my family was catastrophic. Stripped of their ill-gotten financial cushion, their lifestyle took a significant hit. They had to sell their cars and downsize to a small, rented condo. My mother's reputation as a high-flying real estate agent was tarnished. Rumors, as they always do, began to circulate. My father became withdrawn and bitter, but the biggest change was in Ethan. Without the endless flow of cash, his freelance career collapsed. He had no work ethic, no understanding of budgeting, and no real-world skills. He was forced to get a menial job at a retail store. The golden child had lost his shine. I heard through Aunt Susan that he had confronted our parents, angry that they had lied to him and built his life on a theft against me. Their perfect, adoring family unit had fractured under the weight of their own greed. They had sacrificed one child for the other, and in the end, they had lost them both. About 6 months after everything settled, a letter arrived at my new address. It was from Ethan. It was handwritten, and the stationery was cheap. In it, he didn't ask for forgiveness because he knew he didn't deserve it. He simply told me that for the first time in his life, he understood what I had gone through. He understood what it felt like to be invisible, because now, without the money and the status, that's what he was. He wrote that he had started taking a community college course in accounting, of all things. He wanted to understand the numbers that had ruined his life. He was trying to build something real for himself. He ended the letter with a simple, stark sentence. "You deserved better. I'm sorry." I never wrote back, but I kept the letter. It was a final piece of data, a confirmation that the system had been broken and something new, perhaps something better, was beginning to grow in the ruins. My life now is quiet, peaceful, and entirely my own. I excel at my job, I'm surrounded by true friends who value me for who I am, and I have a wonderful relationship with my Aunt Susan. I didn't get the family I was born into, but I inherited something far more valuable: the truth. My name is Charlotte, and I am the architect of my own life. I learned that silence can be a prison, but it can also be the quiet moment before you tear the whole building down and build a home in its place.